Welcome to the Power of Partnership podcast. I'm Riane Eisler, President of the Center for Partnership Systems. This podcast brings you voices from the partnership movement, people using partnership practices to build a world that values caring, nature, and shared prosperity. The Power of Partnership podcast is hosted by Sherry Jacobs-Pruitt, a health policy and partnership scholar. Today, Sherry interviews DXTR Spits, entrepreneur, musician, spoken word artist, and engineer, whose art challenges male conditioning and creatively addresses our connection to mental health. And now on to the POP Pop podcast, showing how exploring how men cry can help the world collectively heal.
Welcome, Dexter, and thank you so much for being a guest on the Power of Partnership podcast. I have really been looking forward to this conversation. So on your website, you're described as a jack of all trades, scientist, engineer, musician, spoken word artist, and entrepreneur. Can you share a bit about your journey becoming this jack of all trades?
How much time do you have? That would be the question, but no. No, I think the best way that I would describe it, I started off as a little sensitive, stuttering kid, I would say, which is kind of funny given the work that I do now. But I grew up with a bunch of older sisters and kind of, some complicated family dynamics, I think, that just kind of pushed on that sensitive version of myself. And I think that showed up in many ways in the form of writing, like the pain or maybe the difficulty of what I was going through at the time got poured into my writing. And that was something that I carried along through my whole process of becoming who I am. So that's kind of the through line. But what I think part of the motivation for the jack of all trades approach, I think, really came from feeling like I needed to check all of these boxes to have a sense of value. I think that's where a lot of it started. And what I realize now was shielding and trying to protect and other things. And not that I would take anything back, but I feel like I look at my work and what I do a lot differently now.
Nice. So you are actually the first guest that I've interviewed for this podcast who didn't already have a very in-depth understanding of Riane Eisler's work and really been greatly impacted by her work. So can you talk a bit about what made you say yes when one of our Center for Partnership Systems volunteers reached out to you and invited you to be a guest with us?
Sure. I think just from looking more into the work, which now piques my mind and curiosity, I think I come most alive when people are having their hearts, minds, or spirits moved in some kind of way. And I think when I cross paths with people that have similar views or missions, even if it looks a little different than mine, it kind of lights a bit of fire for me. So I felt that directly from the work that you all were doing and presenting. So why not say yes?
Love that. Yeah, and I love that you're touching on a theme that Riane talks about. And so if for listeners who haven't listened to episode 1 of the podcast, she makes this point beautifully there, where there's so many of us around the world doing the same kind of work to help create a world that, values caring, nature, and shared prosperity, as the podcast mission is. But we don't always call it the, partnership per se. So now that you've become a bit more familiar with her work, are there aspects of her domination partnership continuum or her other aspects of her research or tools that you have found particularly useful in your thought processes or the work that you're doing?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that definitely stuck out to me, I think she did actually say it in the first podcast, if I recall correctly, which was, does it have to look like this? And I think I look at that in a pretty broad way of the work. And it's a question, I think, if you look at the inverse of that question, which is, well, things are like this and this is how they are. It's this very closed state of being. And we just go with, this is how men are, this is how women are, this is how life and business is. And what I really like about that question of just, does it have to look like this, is it just opens, it allows this realm of possibility, for how life can look, our work can look, and how we connect. Because I think many times in business and life, going about things in the conventional way that maybe I learned, just it hasn't sat right at many different points. So opening up the mind to say, okay, how can we do this differently? I think it's just a really brilliant question. So I think that there are enough men and enough circumstances that have occurred where we know that some of this stuff just doesn't work. Working away the pain, and I mean that quite literally, the thought that I'm going to work sun up to sundown and the pain will resolve, it hasn't really worked. It hasn't worked for me. It hasn't worked for a lot of men that I've spoken with who felt the same way. And so maybe there's the thought, at least at some level, that, oh, this system isn't really treating me too well on the day to day. And I'm stressed and my partner's stressed, or I'm not showing up there and this is happening and that's happening. My health is terrible at this moment, whatever it may be. So I think that's the alert is kind of more prevalent now, I think, for many. And that allows us to then say, asking that question, how can we do this differently? And then try, at least to the best of our ability, to approach it. So
in your work, you talk about the need for men, particularly, to have a safe space. And so can you talk a bit about how you came to recognizing that need, that there really wasn't a safe space for men to share their stories and concerns, or how that made you feel, and how you use your spoken word and your music to try to help create that safe space?
Sure. I would say it definitely came about by accident, like how most things I feel like in my life sometimes have. So I began a process of therapy now over 4 years ago. And in that process, I did what I did through that through line of life, which was I started writing out a lot of what was going on, as I'm beginning and going through this process of trying to heal some of these wounds. And what came from that, I started to read some of those pieces, even just to a few close friends or loved ones in ways of venting, if you will. And then I was pushed by another really great friend of mine to say, you need to go say this basically to the world. And I think the more that I started to perform just some of the poems, even before a formal thought or movement was formed, I could just see how much this resonated with people, and then saw how much these stories had this through line of just this experience of manhood and maleness. And then that sparked me to go and look for other maybe places or spaces that were talking in some other ways. And it's not that they don't exist at all. There are some spaces, but they're few and far between sometimes. And then I think, depending on where you're looking, there's almost too much salesiness to them, where they're still woven in the same frameworks that we have of like, come learn how to be super stoic in your life. And then, and it's like, fine, you can be stoic if you want to too. But I'll just say what I was looking for, I think even within myself, is a a space to actually just be, and a space to be held, and a space to not have to show up with any kind of warrior armor or anything like that. So yeah, it was a bit of a journey to get there, but happy to be creating those spaces now.
Nice. Beautiful. So can you speak about those spaces and the How Men Cry movement that you've started?
Yeah. So How Men Cry, and I think something important about the name How Men Cry is very deliberate. We're not really just talking about physical tears. We're talking about all the different ways that you can cry out from these pain points and traumas and things that aren't really healed. So that might present as depression, issues with, substances, issues within your relationship, things like self-harm, all types of things that I write about and I've also gone through directly. And so I look at How Men Cry as being a bridge for beginning a journey of healing. There is a point of, oh, hey, something's off internally, or maybe I'm feeling a little low quite often, or maybe I'm having these difficulties in relationship or low mood, whatever it may be. So there's that point of recognizing that. And then there's a point of going to actually seek help for some of those things. Maybe that looks like therapy for people. Maybe that looks like being more vulnerable within a relationship. But what I've come to find from working with men and people in general is that can be a really wide space, the space between, hey, I have some discomfort and pain, and then taking the actual step to make a phone call, for instance, to speak to a therapist or to make a request to that partner. So I look at what we do with our work as a means to be a bridge, essentially, from that point of, hey, something is going on here, and how to actually make that step. Now we hold space in two primary ways. One is through giving speaking sessions where I'll kind of weave in a combination of spoken word, meditation, and mindfulness type of tasks, along with journaling and reflections. And then we also use some of those same tactics within men's retreats that we're looking to extend from going to just day longs to more multi-days to week ones to also travel ones. That's where the pathway of that is going. And what's been really great, especially for a lot of the men that I'm working on connecting more around some of this work, is that there are men doing really similar work. And I haven't figured out all of the ways to best partner. That's still kind of cooking right now. But some of the work that you are doing is definitely motivating me to say, okay, how can we connect these things that we're all doing together? We have a similar mission, even if it's connecting in a simple enough way to just say, hey, let's be a support system for one another at times, or hey, let's co-lead a retreat instead of me taking all that, weight on or all those tasks on. So just approaching it in that way is starting to make the path a little more clear. But it is tricky, to say the least, when the dominant narrative is go crush the competition. You got to do the thing.
You are listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. We hope you are enjoying today's episode and you will consider joining our family of sponsors. Or you can help us attract sponsors by downloading, following, or subscribing to the series, and liking and rating each episode you view on YouTube. We also would love to hear from you, including if you have a partnership story that you would like to share. Reach out to us at center@partnershipway.org. And now, back to today's episode. And when we're thinking about that men's mental health healing, can you speak a little bit about the role that vulnerability plays in that?
Yeah.
Lack of access to vulnerability, really.
Yeah, it's such a crucial piece. And I think what is tricky to circle back to even my own personal story, sensitivity, that I was labeled a sensitive kid. And I remember that being a reason or point to be shut down. Sometimes even within my direct family unit, that was a thing to be bullied for. That was a thing to be teased for, to be called names, to have all types of labels put on you for, sensitivity, which I would say is kind of synonymous to being vulnerable. And what I think is so unfortunate for that messaging for so many men is that we will trick ourselves into the idea of, oh, I don't have this feeling, or I don't experience this, or I'm so stoic that this doesn't impact me. And when you really dig deep enough, it's like, it's not that this stuff doesn't impact you. You may have defense mechanisms and other things that allow you, and maybe you do have a healthy way of processing some of these feelings and thoughts and emotions. But if we can't really deeply look at the vulnerable sides of ourselves, to me, I feel like you're missing out on such a large piece of the human, the human experience, really. And that's what I think is kind of sad, because tapping into some of those things may allow us to show up better, with our partners. It may allow us to show up better with ourselves. It may allow us to say, hey, that actually hurt. And from this hurting, I have this kind of need from it. And maybe this is how we can talk about it. So part of what we are doing is changing narratives around men's mental health. But the other thing that we are doing is destigmatizing conversations around mental health in general, because men's mental health healing is basically worldly healing. There's no separation to me. So.
And your spoken word piece, Learned, it just really captures that essence beautifully. I wonder if you can share just a bit of that piece with our listeners.
It says, she left before I had a chance to realize. She left before I had a chance to heal. She left before I had a chance to tell her that I am sorry, that I learned it from my father, from my brothers and friends, the TV, the music, from everywhere that I thought I was supposed to learn from. And I think from looking at that piece and even looking at my personal experience, it takes a while to evaluate in a safe and healthy way what a lot of these different inputs that we've had on us from our lifetime. Like it's a really delicate process. And unfortunately, I didn't even learn how to start to do that until I was 30 years old. And that for me could be very early in comparison to some other men in the world. There are, several guys that I know who do men's work who are a little further up, and they're in the thought, oh man, if I just would have had that input. But for me, I'm looking at that and thinking, so I just learned how to talk about my feelings and say what hurt me maybe by 30 years old. So how can I have been, and I wasn't truly, but I was going to say, how could I have been in successful relationship prior to that point, without even having that, what I would consider now a basic ability, but where I have to give guys a lot of grace as well too, is it's kind of like the, you don't know what you don't know kind of scenario, where if it's so much layers of conditioning on us, how can we really get there? And that's why I think the approach for men has to be really compassionate. It has to be gentle, and it has to have a lot of space so that some of those layers can kind of unravel a little better.
Beautiful. Can you speak more about travel and how that fits in to the movement?
Sure. So one of the things that I'll do when I'll travel, if possible, is to perform and go and speak, work with companies, performance shows, whatever opportunity it arises. But I think the other thing about it is it keeps me in a mode of being grounded, and also in a way being in motion, but also being grounded and realizing the connection of a lot of the stories of men, not just where I am right now. This really is, I think, a global conversation. And it's a global conversation that I think a lot more men are ready for than what we, and I'm just saying societal, we may think they are. And the ultimate goal here for the retreats is I want to be able to do them in travel locations, essentially, so that we can bring guys out of maybe some of their day-to-day to be able to really sink into themselves and the moment and meditate together, find some brotherhood, community, all of those things.
So Dexter, in preparing for my interview with you, one of my favorite examples of you as a human is your Tiny Desk video of the song Slave Name. Can you talk just a little bit about that piece of music?
Sure.
And the musicians you're working with who are just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. That was when I was performing still with more of my full band, Nexus J. I don't know, they got some of the other band members probably have their own names, but I'm just going to say the amazing individuals who played alongside with the Dexter band. And that was, we had actually submitted the year before for our Tiny Desk competition. We actually got picked as one of the top 3 bands to perform for the city of Chicago. And that was our second year submission where we really went all out. We still got recognized. They ended up not doing a tour stop there. But I think that video really embodies the music side of me probably as a whole. That's like what our live performance is like. That's some of all of that writing, delivery of the song and other things was a combination of myself and Nexus J, my good producer buddy, Caleb Harris, if he listens to this. And then just the band for bringing it to come alive. I mean, they just did a crazy job. But I would say that's probably some of the most, it was a very raw form of expression. I think that's why I've always loved and enjoyed music, and side by side with, my work with spoken word is it allows you to kind of tell your story in a way that can be theatrical, it can be raw emotion, it can be playful. So I think that one kind of embodies all of those things. And that was a really fun shoot as well. And one thing to point out, it's a one straight through shot. There's no edit in the video for Slave Name. It's one straight through take.
Nice. And it seems like there's an economic message in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what that really was talking about is kind of butting heads with the kind of corporate life, or just this idea of how we're supposed to just plug away, not even just corporate, just working life in general. We're just supposed to plug away like these little worker bees and go do our little jobs and kind of shut up and just allow society to move us along in this wave. So in a way, it's kind of this, I hate to say like rebelling against the system, but it is kind of the vantage point that it was written from.
Yeah, and your spoken word pieces also really touch on these pushing back, and so I wonder if you can say just a touch about your spoken word piece around violence and pushing back on the narratives that ignore the realities of people's lives that really is creating societies that, the challenges that we're having in many societies today.
Yeah, I think I would say first, just for my spoken word approach in general, and there's actually a really deliberate reason why I want the spoken word, for the men's mental health work, is because I think it allows the words to fall to the ears differently than music. Sometimes with music, there can be a lot in the way, and there's something raw about just storytelling, because that's actually the way that I write all of those pieces, is really with a through line story and metaphor. And I think what I try to articulate, if I can, is stuff for the audience to walk away and make their own judgment from. But in, some of the pieces, I'm trying to convey that there can be pain on a lot of sides of an equation. So my poem, Understand,
Yes.
is the poem. So in the poem, I kind of depict in a way that there's this pain on both sides of the a weapon, essentially. I kind of talk about, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who may watch some of the performance, but essentially you just see that there is pain on both sides of many equations that sometimes we will criticize. And I think it's harder to see that so much of what we're going through in society is coming from a root place of trauma quite often. And we tend to blame the symptom or the action. And I think that's pretty across the board. We usually look at what somebody's doing. Look at what's happening with this person. Look at what they did. And I'm immediately going more to a space of, I wonder what happened to them, or I wonder how they actually got to this point. It's like, because people don't just exist and, cause harm within the world without some type of harm. I would say generally, without some type of rooting of harm in some way, shape, or form or another to their life.
So moving forward, are there some next steps or resources that you'd like to share with our listeners who are on a journey to connect more deeply with themselves and with others?
Yeah, so for How Men Cry next year, we're going to be doing more men's retreats, working on day long and then multi-day ones. For the moment, that's been based in the Chicago area, but I'm looking to branch much of that off and, again, try to collaborate with more individuals in different spaces. And then the other way to probably more directly work with us is to work with us on a speaking session where, again, we combine spoken word material, meditation, reflections, journalings, and kind of weave all of these things together so that we have a creative way to build that bridge about talking about our mental health. And then last but not least, part of the creative things that I've also been working on doing is coaching in a more one-on-one basis, because I think that it helps, one, for me to grow, but it also helps, I think, a lot of guys directly. And what I'm coming to find as well, too, is women that want to have a better understanding of what to do with guys sometimes. So that's probably the easiest ways that we can directly connect and collaborate. But of course, feel free to reach out to me directly or to our website, which is being reformatted to show all the wonderful things that we're doing now.
Beautiful. And we'll include a link to that on the podcast show notes as well. I wonder, before we close, if you have any final words you'd like to share with our listeners about living more fully and how we can change our narratives and paradigms to make a more compassionate world.
Yeah, I think maybe the best thing that we can do is slow down. I think that's probably going to be my number one for that, is to slow down and take enough time to be with ourselves and to realize that there is nothing wrong with taking a moment to realize if you are in pain, or even if you're not, even if you're at a point of joy and happiness, these states are temporary, but the story that we all have, our stories are all connected from our own past and childhoods and pains and woundings, but also joy and happiness. And that connects just like the next person, that we're sitting across from. And I think if we can just kind of, remember this pathway that we've had, and that somebody else is on a pathway, not just like that, but just like that, from the context of having, a story, and just see the humanity in one another, I think the world has a shot at being a better and better place.
Wonderful. Well, I want to say thank you so much again for this beautiful conversation. And I want to remind our listeners that in the podcast show notes, you will have access to a link to Dexter Spitz's website, his YouTube channel, and of course, as always, there will be a link to the Center for Partnership Systems, where you can always dig deeper into courses and resources to learn more about Dr. Riane Eisler's cultural transformation theory, the domination-partnership continuum, and of course, the 4 cornerstones of every society of childhood and family, gender, economics, and narratives and stories. Thank you for listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. We're grateful to Rising Appalachia for the use of resilience as our Power of Partnership theme music. If you would like us to feature your partnership story, or if you would like to be a proud sponsor of the Power of Partnership podcast, please contact us at center@partnershipway.org. We hope you enjoyed this episode and will leave us a review on your favorite podcast channel. And don't forget to subscribe to be notified when new episodes are released. I'm Cherry Jacobs Pruitt. See you next time on the Power of Partnership podcast.
I am resilient. I trust the movement. I negate the chaos. Uplift the negative. I'll show up at the table again and again and again. I'll close my mouth and learn to